Hello, and welcome to part two of this mod making series for at least for this part of the series, locked loot containers. And the first thing that I'm going to do this episode is something that is very important but is often neglected. While it can be annoying initially to set up if you don't already have an account, but that thing will be a Git repository. In my case, I'm going to be using what probably most people use, and that is GitHub. So you can do whatever way you want to do this. I am not familiar with the entire history of Git and the entire how to actually use Git itself. That kind of code management or version management thing. I have looked into it. I have seen, people that you could use like PowerShell and all that stuff to do this manually with the console and everything. But I'm pretty crap with that, so I haven't really tried to. But if you want to do it that way, that's completely fine. If you know how to do that, I'm gonna do it with GitHub. If you also want to do it with something else like Gitbase, I forget what the other one is called, but there's so many other managers and websites and applications you could use. I'm sure that's essentially the idea here, is to use this Git process to back up, manage your versions of your code, so you could more easily make changes and revert changes if there's regressions or whatever experimentation. You can make branches, so you can have different versions of your code and then go back or forward with them and such. It's very extremely useful, as well as easily sharing your code with others if you wish. I am going to be using, as I said, GitHub with the application, or with the, I guess you could say, desktop application program app, whatever. GitHub Desktop. This is my preferred way to manage my stuff. Even though I use the web application too of GitHub, this one I just prefer to use it as the manager. So what we're first going to want to do is, well, I'm sure you'll probably get set up with a process, but when you make a new repository for whatever mod you're doing, it's going to already have or it's going to make a folder automatically if you say create new repository. You could do add existing repository too. I prefer to just do new and then just copy paste my code and then make another commit, whatever. I don't know. I just do it that way. But we're going to do that. And obviously the most important thing to do first is to, I guess, have a name. It doesn't really matter. Like, you can name it anything. But I prefer to keep it basically the exact same name I use for the folder inside of my mod folder in the Unity editor, or whatever you have your mod folder. So at least in GitHub Desktop, I don't know what you're going to use, but hopefully if you do use something else than this, you know how to do it. But do add, create new repository, repository name, I'm just going to copy and paste, DFU, dash mod, locked loot containers, description. I think I made a mod description. Let me actually see if I have it in the dfmod.json. Did I? Yes, I did. I'll just copy and paste that. Not that it's hard to change it or anything later on. I just like to have it sort of right the first time. And for me, it'll go to my local path users, documents, GitHub. That's where the folder will be put, initialized with repository. Yeah, I just do it anyway. Now this stuff, if you know how to use Git better than I do, you probably will do stuff like git ignore and stuff. I don't know how to use it, so I'm not even gonna bother. I never do. Even though I probably should learn how to do it, but yeah. Too advanced for my dumbass. But then create repository, and it'll make a folder inside of a new folder inside of your, wherever you have your GitHub folder. So where is it now? This is where all my other crap is, obviously. Locked loot containers, and then it's just empty. So what I'm gonna do is I have two screens, so I'm just kind of dragging and dropping the file explorers from above and then below so you could see it on the first screen. But this is my mod folder that I have. So it's the exact same name. I'm just going to Control A, Control C, copy everything from that, and then paste it right into that new GitHub folder created by GitHub Desktop. And this is everything in there. This includes, this part kind of sucks, but, you know, just because if you have OCD like me, when you're using something like Unity, the Unity editor or whatever, it's better to include all of those seemingly superfluous filler meta files, because they're like, even though they feel like filler, and maybe they are in some regards, they are important for Unity's settings, kind of, like, depending on what you're doing. Like, the actual scripts and code usually doesn't matter, the metadata. Like, it'll just create new metadata when you put the folder in there when it imports it, so it doesn't really matter in those cases. But when you're doing stuff like textures, especially, potentially stuff like audio files, potentially stuff like prefabs, any stuff that you change settings within the Unity editor, that will matter, because if those settings are different, then you'll have to redo them, or if you don't redo them, then they'll be, all your settings that you had will be gone for those textures, and like I said, you'll have to redo them, or you'll load it and then it'll be like, oh, why is my texture all blurry or something like that. Unfortunately, even though the meta files can be kind of spammy, I would definitely suggest keeping them there in this case when using something like Unity that has this metadata stuff attached to every file. So every file that we currently have for this mod, stuff like this, mod settings, it's not really important. Yeah, so don't be intimidated by seeing, like, what's that? That's stuff that's going to be used later on. dfmod.json, that file will be created when you first do your mod building process, which use the mod builder tool. We'll go after that more eventually, but this is the main ones. Basically, is the name of your mod folder and the scripts, whatever the hell you have in there, and all that stuff. Just copy and paste it into there. And now that I know it's in there, I will close this. And then this GitHub desktop will update when that folder has been changed, and it'll say, oh, all these files have been added with all this stuff, metadata, everything. We'll just make a commit. It doesn't, you don't need to give it much of a name. Like, you do have to give it a name, but it doesn't have to be that descriptive. You don't want it to be. But it's good to make it descriptive, because then you know what the hell you did without having to look through every change. So we'll just say initial commit, the date. You don't have to put the date. Honestly, this is just me and my OCD that prefers to do it. But since this is the first thing, this is like bare bones, basically, mod. We're just gonna have, this is like basically clean slate for this mod. The first commit. So then we'll click commit to main. And now it is committed to the, at least in the GitHub Desktop's case, it is committed to GitHub Desktop, but it hasn't put the changes, it hasn't published the repository to the actual, like, internet, if you want to say. It hasn't published it to the actual GitHub repo that is outside of this computer environment, outside of this environment. So once we just press publish repository, then it'll go to the actual, like, website, so you can see it online and everything. So we'll do that. You have your name, description, and I don't know what GitHub Enterprise is. I don't know. Yeah, just github.com is what I always use. And if you want to make puppies cry and me sad, you could say keep this code private. But what I always do, since I like to share my code, I like other people to see it. I like to be able to see other people's code as well. So, I always uncheck this. So it's public. And then click publish repository. It'll take a few seconds. And then that will be updated. So when you go on your GitHub account on whatever your GitHub manager thing that you prefer to use. Let's refresh. This is my profile, GitHub profile. Let's refresh it. There we go. Well, should say it here, I think. Yeah, there we go. So in my repositories tab, now you can see that it has been updated. So there's the GitHub for this mod, locked loot containers. Now, other people that are more professional than me, that have more code that they commit to other projects and stuff, they probably don't like to spam their GitHub repositories page and stuff with like a bunch of just separate Daggerfall Unity mods. So a lot of the times they will have just one like DFU mods repository, and then they'll just make a separate folder for each mod inside of that. I don't do that. That's just me. I don't know. I like to have it separately. That's just how I like to work, even though it's probably much more disorganized for some people. I just like to do it this way. So I have a separate repository for each mod I make, essentially. But here it is. You can view it on the website. If you use Git, the actual whatever you'd call it, the thing that is not one of these online managers, then I'm sure you could see the changes on there and everything and do whatever you need to do. You could have other people make commits to your or pull request and fork your mod and watch it and everything so they could see what's going on. And yeah, so I would heavily suggest doing this for any time you start a modding project, just because this way you can it's just an extra form of backup if you want to look at it that way. Backup as well as versions backup. So every time you make a change, if you actually like update it regularly, then you can go back if something went wrong, and it's easy to go back and forward, relatively easy to go back and forward. Yeah, it's just super handy. It takes a little bit of initial setup, but it's totally worth it. But yeah, after that long description of how to use GitHub and GitHub Desktop in this case, we now have a way to basically every time okay, there's better ways to do that than I just did, but the way I do it is just a kind of stupid way, I guess, is that every time I make changes that I want to commit to the GitHub repo, I will just Control A, Control C, and then essentially just put in any new files and override any of the old files from that GitHub repo on my system or folder, and then I'll make the commit that way. That's essentially how I do it. So I don't always do it every day, but sometimes I'll do it, I don't know, every few days, or maybe I'll do it multiple times a day if I'm working on it that much. It depends, but that's just how I do it. But anyway, all that crap out of the way. Important step, but, one that is often neglected. So, now, back to the actual project at hand. What I'm going to go over right this second is basically kind of how I look at when I make mods, especially when I'm initially making mods and setting up the backbone infrastructure and base stuff of it and all that, base functions that I'll need. I will think, and I'll think, and I'll think some more. And a lot of times I will think way too much, and that'll actually screw me over in the end, or at least it'll make me not want to do it. But I will think, and hopefully after a point I will stop thinking and I will take some action and actually do something with that thinking. But in this case, when it actually goes right, I will be thinking of what mods, what other things have done something similar to what problems I will have to solve, or what things I will have to do in the current mod that I'm working on. So, for example, when I was, say, working on arena-style flavor text recoded and descriptions, whatever that, I forget what the name exactly is called, I had to think, okay, what is somewhere else that either in my own mods, my own code, or somebody else's code and somebody else's mods, or just in the, and then you, oftentimes I'll fall back to the base DFU code. Where can I find something that does something similar to what I had done, what I need to do, or what I believe I need to do, how I plan to solve this problem? What is some place similar I could pull from to take either inspiration from, or just straight copy and paste and then repurpose it, or whatever. This is for me the way that I initially start so many parts of my code. This is how I personally work so much on this stuff, is by repurposing other people's code, or especially repurposing my own code and using it to my own means, my own ends, whatever. Now, you won't always have your own mods to pull from, so then you are either you are then required to either look at other people's mods, which they hopefully have their code available and easily accessible, or you will have to look at the base Daggerfall Unity code base, which is thankfully open source, and you can look at the code with your eyes. You know, you can you can look directly at it and see what it is by, say, let's just give a quick example in that case. So this is the Daggerfall Unity 0.14.4 code files, whatever you want to say, all the files. You would say go to, in my case, assets, scripts, and then you could just go through all of these different scripts, files, folders that have more scripts in it that keep nesting into each other, and just eat your heart out. Just go crazy. Just look at everything if you want. But, you know, it's usually more productive to say search for certain specific keywords that might help you find your thing quicker. And then hopefully at some point you find something that you can think of that you can repurpose to your what you need to do. It doesn't always happen that way, unfortunately, and then sometimes you'll have to be stuck actually having to make your own code, which sucks, depending on your skill level or whatever. That, or you'll have to go on the forums or Discord or the Reddit or whatever communities, Twitter, whatever communities, YouTube, I don't know, get Stack Overflow, God forbid. Um, ask general questions there, or ask specific questions on the ones that are more catered to it, like the community ones, and hope that somebody knows, or hope that you can somehow figure it out. Sometimes having a nice rest can help you figure out. Give your gut, your brain a little bit time to communicate, so you can in the morning figure out what you need to do. Sometimes that's just what happens. But in this case, I thankfully do know what to do, at least for some of these parts of this mod so far. You know, some of the important parts of this mod, I know what I have to do, and what parts of my own mods, or other people's mods, or other pieces of code I can repurpose to do what I need to do. That whole thing out of the way. With that, we will actually do our first thing that I plan on doing. Even though you don't have to do it in any particular order. You can do, if you want to get right into save data, which I will have to do with this mod most likely, otherwise the loot, the chest, and the containers will probably not save or be loaded properly, and then they'll just disappear, and after if you load or save, which sucks. So I'll have to deal with save data, unfortunately, eventually, but I'm not going to do that now. That's usually something I do later on, if possible. But you can do that first if you're crazy enough. I'm gonna do some of the event handlers that I know how to do first. And even if I don't put anything into them, I'm just gonna put them there to know, okay, I'm gonna have to do this later. So that first one we are going to do is, I believe it is called, I'm gonna find it, but I believe it is called On Transition Interior Dungeon or something like that. And I'm going to find that. Well, first, since I'm lucky enough, I'm going to find it in one of my own mods that I've used it in. So then I could find where it is and then tell you how it kind of works. Yeah, arena style flavor text. this has an on-transition interior at least, which should lead to on-transition interior dungeon as well. So I will do open the main, because I'm pretty sure that's in the main with Visual Studio. It'll open that file. If you have your, this is all going by the assumption that you have your mod kind of properly hooked in to the Unity environment for this particular DFU version or whatever, like the project, because then you can do all the fancy things like that I'm going to be using, such as holding if it yeah holding control, and then it'll let you directly like go to the reference where that thing is referencing from and such. It's so handy. It is so handy. I don't know what I would do without it. You can do it without it, but it's a real pain in the balls. At least that's all I know. So here we are in arena style flavor text main, and we're gonna go down to where my start function is for this. And there we go. We got both on transition interior, on transition dungeon interior, and it is apparently in player enter exit. So we will hold control and then click on this on transition, and then it'll bring us to the file or the script that this is referenced in, which is player enter exit. And in this case, the event handler that it references, this is what an event handler is called, this stuff and all these other things down here. An event, I guess. You don't have to know what most of this stuff does, but you will know that these become very useful when you want to do stuff that is... You want stuff to specifically trigger at certain times or events. And in this case, we want something to trigger as soon as a dungeon interior is being loaded, such as when you click on the door or the entrance to a dungeon. This event fires because this is what happens when it loads up the entire dungeon. You see that black screen for a few moments or however long it takes to load, and that's the transition period. And that's when this will trigger and then allow any events that are, as it's called, subscribed to this event to then do whatever they need to do. And in my case, with this mod, on transition, we got the reference there, player enter exit dot, and then the event handler's name, which would be on transition dungeon interior. There it is. This thing. And then plus equals, I don't want to go like super in depth, like every little thing, but I'm trying to, for this beginning part at least, trying to explain it in somewhat in depth to give some understanding of what's going on. Like, so if somebody's reading through any of this stuff themselves, they could be like, oh, that's what that is. So when you see that kind of thing in this case, plus equals does not always mean this, but in this case, plus equals is subscribing to this particular event handler. And minus equals would be unsubscribing from it, but we're not too worried about that right this second. In this case, we are just, as soon as the mod initializes, it will be subscribing to this event handler, basically telling the program, or whatever you want to say, basically telling Daggerfall Unity that it wants to run this method here, show flavor text on transition dungeon interior. It wants this method here, this method, to run any time that event handler is triggered, and then it does whatever it needs to do. So after all that explanation, let us basically just, in my case, just copy and paste this. I mean, you'll see this kind of stuff sometimes. It's not, unfortunately, the event handlers don't always get used in the code. They're just there, which is helpful too, but so you won't always have a great example, but you could often find an example somewhere for many of these. But in this case, we will do take out do stuff, and we'll actually do stuff technically. So copy and paste that, and then it'll put the red line because the method that currently does not exist, but we will make it exist. But this all is fine. On transition dungeon exterior, plus minus, and then whatever method name you're going to use. So in my case, instead of show flavor text, I don't know exactly what it's going to do at this moment, but I have a general idea. So I'm going to say add loot chest. I'm going to say add loot chest on dungeon interior. Just something that is fairly descriptive. It's not descriptive of exactly what's going to happen, but it's a general idea of what's going to happen in the end, what the result is. So then, now that we have that, then if we want to, we could just make a separate method, but I like to just kind of copy and paste the old method and then just delete what I don't need, which is most of it in this case. So here's this big method. And I like to do my spacing. I like to do at least 2 lines between each thing. I eventually organize everything later on. Yeah, and then you'll get a whole bunch of errors, but that's fine. And just all this crap, I'm just gonna get rid of it. Ah, nice and clean. And then change this, copy and paste with that. And then you have this thing, args, which is like, stands for arguments, kind of. And if you go to the actual event handler, you will get an idea of what args actually is. And I believe in this case, what you can use from args, it's either static door and Daggerfall dungeon, or these ones. I kind of forget. 2 dungeon interior, static door, null. Yeah, it's probably these 2, but you get to use some of these things if you want to from those args. So if I say do args dot, yeah. So this is like all the stuff that args has inside of it, which can be really handy for whatever you have them be doing with that event handler in question. So in this case, Daggerfall Dungeon will actually, if it's working, it should give you all of the information of whatever that dungeon you are currently transitioning into has. And you can do whatever with that. Yeah, you can find, like, anything involved with that specific dungeon, this object at least, and so many other things. So args, these arguments very useful. But we don't need those right now. But we have the very first baby steps to where our mod will be starting, which is at least one of the many things that this mod will be using. This is just one of the main ones, because we want, basically, the first thing that I want to see is chests in dungeons that are locked. So the first thing we want to do is obviously do something when dungeons are first entered and when they're being loaded. And in this case, when this event handler happens. After all that description, this video has gone on longer than I expected for that initial kind of thing. So yeah, I'm not going to probably go that much farther in this one. I'm probably going to stop it here. But yeah, that's super basic, but I think I got a decent amount of information out there at least. We have some other mod files here that are useful, such as, well, we could always just close these and find them again. Look for other people's mods. If you need to, ask for other people's mod code examples. Ask people around, like, where does this get used in other people's mods that I can use it or something like this. How to do the GitHub repo thing. And speaking of that, since I'm going to stop it here anyway, we're going to get into much more, like, a lot less of that explanation in the next one. I guarantee that we're going to be doing a lot more of the actual practical, if you want to go by that, the actual practical side of this parts. But in this case, we just got this little very important stuff done, explained. But yeah, in this case, I'm going to close out of Visual Studio now, since I have that file saved. So might as well show you how I said I did the GitHub repo commits, and then end it there. So let's go back to where I got that mods, locked loop containers. Then I don't need to do this. I'm just gonna, yeah, I'll just make it easier on myself and just copy those two from these scripts. Close that. And then go back to the GitHub folder, scripts, paste. Then those are pasted, so that got changed with those few little things we changed. And then when we go back to GitHub Desktop, you will see the things that we changed. We got rid of do stuff, we added the event handler, and we added the empty method for that event handler. So then now we'll say we'll just say first event handler added on transition dungeon interior. I go too long with these commit descriptions, but that's just how I do it. You don't have to do it like I do. Then commit to main, push origin. And when you do push origin, that will commit it to the actual like desktop application, like I said. And then you could look at the history, and you will see what commits you've done. So if I wanted to, I could say, I'm not going to do it, but if I wanted to, I would say revert changes in commit. And then it would basically, as far as I know, go back, amend commit, which is like probably not as used if you wanted to make like one little correction or something. Create branches from this kind of thing, all that kind of stuff. But this is extremely useful to use. Definitely went on longer than it probably should have, but yeah, hopefully this was useful, and I hope in part 3 we will get down to more to the nitty-gritty actual making of the mod stuff. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.